volunteering with the Academy or Aspen or any of those groups, offering your services and participating and being active leads you to a wider network. And it's such an amazing learning experience.
Do you ever have so many questions and no one to ask, so they're just wasting away on Google searches you'll forget about in an hour or so?
We had that same problem, and that's why we created the RD2BE podcast, a resource for dietetic and nutrition students looking for answers that their peers don't have.
We are students Macy and Emily and registered dietitian Carl Barnes. We engage in conversations and learn from RDs.
Join us weekly as we gain insight into the unique journeys of registered dietitians all over the country.
All right, welcome back to another week of the RD2BE podcast. I'm your registered dietitian host, Carl Barnes. This is our weekly podcast where we sit down each week with a different registered dietitian to highlight the diversity of opportunity in the profession and really dismantle the notion of there being a traditional career path, showing all these awesome dietitians and the numerous roles that they hold or have held and how it may or may not inspire you in some way. So this week we're sitting down with Patricia Becker. She's a pediatric neonatal nutrition specialist at Dayton Children's Hospital. She does a lot more, so really excited to have you here. Thanks for being here, Patricia.
Well, you're welcome. So thanks for having me. So Carl asked me to, give a little description of my bio. So I am a pediatric neonatal nutrition specialist, and I work part-time at Dayton Children's Hospital, where I am the NICU dietitian. So I see patients in the NICU and take care of those itty-bitty babies in the NICU. But I also have a private practice, RD.com. And through my private practice, I do a variety of things. I speak on pediatric and neonatal malnutrition. I write journal articles. I am the co-editor of Pediatric Nutrition and Clinical Care with my friend Sue Koenig. And I'm an expert witness. As a matter of fact, I have a call with a lawyer after this podcast. So I do quite a variety of things.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. So what gravitated you towards wanting to become a NICU dietitian?
So that's an interesting question. And I'm sure that you dietitians who have been in the profession for quite a few years, we kind of land where we're planted, but I always wanted to be a pediatric dietitian. So I navigated my career towards that. So, kind of like you guys found, I volunteered with the Academy. My first kind of volunteer job was to help with the diet manual when I lived here in Cincinnati when I was a student. And so that was my first experience. And so that, put me in the path of individuals who worked in those kinds of fields. So I worked in a variety of in jobs. And so I got to know people and I volunteered and they knew who I was. And so after I'd worked for probably 15 years, a position came open and in a new NICU, and it was kind of an evolving career path. There'd never been a dietitian in the NICU in this particular hospital. And a colleague of mine who I'd worked with on a conference said, I had done a little bit of pediatrics in older children at Fairlawn Rehab Hospital where I worked. And so I was offered the position. When I moved to North Carolina, having had that experience, moved into the NICU and then moved into UNC Healthcare and worked in pediatrics there and managed the pediatric dietitians there. And so have moved in and out of NICUs ever since. So when I came to Dayton Children's, I was doing pediatric outpatient and they needed someone in their NICU. So I've moved in and out of NICUs as well as, all other aspects of pediatrics, but the NICU is my favorite.
Great. So what are some challenging and then rewarding parts of working in a NICU?
Well, the most rewarding thing about the NICU and why it's one of my favorites is you're a well-respected member of the team. What you do in the NICU in taking care of these itty-bitty patients is it really makes a difference in the outcome for the patient. And you really get to see them, grow and thrive and go home. And so the outcomes are awesome. The vast majority of the babies in the NICU have excellent outcomes and thrive and go home. The hardest part about the NICU is that the babies are really sick. They occasionally don't survive. And so I think just like with some disciplines in pediatrics, so like hematology, oncology, like oncology and the PICU and the NICU are critical care units, and our patients don't survive. And so I think that a lot of times that's something that happens to dietitian that's kind of overlooked. And so I think, kind of a mental health thing that is a challenge for clinicians that is sometimes is overlooked. And so that's an interesting aspect of practice that I think needs to be paid attention to sometimes. Our feelings get hurt.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people pay attention, like you said, to the growth and the children and the baby is getting better, but there's also the alternative. So I feel like that's something they don't really prepare us for.
No, they don't prepare us for. The thing that's nice about Dayton Children's is that they do have some grief support for staff. And unlike in some places that I've worked, they do include dietitians, which is unusual. So I think Dayton Children's is an amazing place. So, you need to kind of look for that staff support in some institutions sometimes.
Definitely. So I know you work at Dayton Hospital 3 days a week, and then you do private practice and other things other days during the week.
Ooh.
So what do you do within the private practice?
So what other kind of crazy things do I do? So later this month, so I work for Columbus State Community College. And one of the things that I do is human milk lab tech training. Okay. So we will be training the people who work in the milk lab at Pennsylvania State Hospital. And so hospitals who have NICUs or children's hospitals where they collect, store, fortify, and dispense human milk for babies in the NICU. So we train those staff to how to do that safely and correctly. So those milk labs are, kind of mandated by the Joint Commission. And so we certify those techs. So it's a college certification course. And so so they get granted, so it can be grant money, but it's a program that we provide through the community college.
And is it a single course? Or
it is. It's a certification course. So just like you might go to community college and get your associate's degree, you can go to a community college and get certification as well. And this is a course that is a certification for their techs.
Great.
Yeah. So that's one of the things. So I was saying earlier, I'm an expert witness. So sometimes lawyers contact me in my areas of expertise, which happen to be human milk and malnutrition. And so sometimes I provide information on those issues for cases of malpractice or legal cases. So that's one thing I do. And I write. I'm a published author. I have a article in Nutrition and Clinical Practice this month, actually.
Great.
I know.
Awesome. So how do you balance all of that with working in a hospital?
That's a good question. I really need to learn how to say no. It can be stressful. I mean, sometimes I'm not very good at saying no, because I got to the place I am today because I don't say no very often. I accept all the opportunities, the amazing, awesome opportunities that come to me. I always say yes. So I work a lot. So I'm not very good at life work balance, to be honest. I work weekends. I work weekends. So I keep saying one of these days I'm going to learn to say no, but then somebody says to me, do you want to present at this growth summit? And I say, absolutely, because it's like 3 months away and it seems like a good idea. So, yeah.
So as if you don't have enough going on, what is the process that you went through to become the chair of Pediatric Nutrition Practice Group?
So I always say yes. So whenever any opportunity comes along, and often I just volunteer. So it started, there was a conference and I volunteered to be on the committee, and I volunteered to be on the next committee. And I ended up, when I was in North Carolina, for the state affiliate, and I volunteered with Sylvia Escott Stump, and we ran 2, state meetings. And as time went on, Sylvia ended up being the president of the academy. And, you volunteer, and then the people end up being the director of the House of Delegates. I'm on, the malnutrition committee with Aspen, and then the people are running for the board. And so that's what happens. The more you volunteer, the people So someday, you volunteered, and so then one thing leads to another. So volunteering with the academy or Aspen or any of those groups, offering your services and participating and being active, leads you to a wider network. And it's such an amazing learning experience, as I'm sure you have found, that it just broadens your horizons and your network, and that it just leads you. And then somebody says, do you want to be chair of the Pediatric Nutrition Practice Group? And you say, yes, absolutely. And then you end up being chair of the Pediatric Nutrition Practice Group, or, chair of the Malnutrition Committee, or you end up being on the Pediatric Malnutrition Work Group who writes the consensus statement. I got appointed to that board by Sylvia Escott Stump, and ended up being the first author on the consensus statement as a result. And so one thing leads to another. So you just always say yes to every amazing opportunity that comes your way.
Mm-hmm. So what do you do in that role?
So I'm no longer the chair. So I was chair in 2018 and 19. So and so then I was past chair. So now I'm chair of the Pediatric Nutrition Practice Group Malnutrition Committee. So at the moment, I'm not chair of anything at the moment. But I'm also on the Aspen Malnutrition Committee as well. So those are my committees at the moment.
Great. So what kind of advice do you have for students who want to get involved but are a little bit hesitant or weary about saying yes to everything?
Yeah, I would just start small. I know when I think the burden there's quite a burden on students, I think dietetic students at the moment. I know that it's a steep climb. I mean, you guys have a lot of coursework. The demands to get into an internship, I think, are great. Your grades matter a lot. So I think the demands are very high. So I think anything you can do, to volunteer, whether it be with your student dietetic association, is always a great place to start to absolutely be involved. But I think, Emily, you have found that, even just volunteering with your food bank. I volunteer with a group called Green Umbrella, which is a food it reaches out to all kinds of food insecurity groups, just to stay involved with the community. So being involved with those kinds of groups is always good. Your local, we have a Gorham heritage farm here that does, organic farming. So being involved with any kind of, food related activity is nice for your resume. I know that the hospitals and, the children's hospitals the dietitians there are very, very busy, and they may not always be able to, accept the student into their workplace to allow for volunteerism. But I think, other food related or even child related activities are valuable for your experience. So even if you're involved in, camp kind of experiences, or, even church child related experiences, I think are good kind of experiences if you're interested in pediatrics.
Great. And then I guess my final question is, since a lot of RD2Bs that at least I know, want to get into that teaching education aspect within dietetics, how do you think they should best expose themselves to get into that?
So when you say teaching education, do you mean like at the college level?
Yes, like teaching, whether it's, at a college level, educating high school or middle school students, just getting into any type of an education forum.
Yeah, and I think schools are really desperate at this juncture for support from the community. I think especially with COVID. So I know that even in my area, school districts are really looking for any kind of support. So I think the opportunities at this moment are much more available than they have been in the past. So I think, asking and asking and asking, I think persistence and even making a pest of yourself can be very effective. And that if you continue to ask and you continue to offer your assistance, it never falls on deaf ears. And tenaciousness is always, and is always beneficial. So if you keep saying to somebody, if you need me, I'm available. And if they say, well, right now we don't have anything. And then you call back and say, I see that you're having this event. Do you need an extra pair of hands? And then they say, well, maybe we could use your help. So if they say no the first time, never take no for an answer. I think if it's something you really are interested in, because when I decided I wanted pediatrics and I didn't get pediatrics, it took me 15 years to become a pediatric dietitian, but it was something that I wanted to do. So I continued to pursue it. And then I finally became a pediatric dietitian. So you only fail at your attempt if you give up. I think it's the basic concept.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure. And the opportunities, I think, for up and coming dietitians are tremendous. And I recently added to one of my presentations that, do you know there's only 108 registered dietitians in the country, 108,000. So which is a very, very small number. And there are only, 2,900 members of the Pediatric Nutrition Practice Group, so pediatric dietitians. There are only 953 certified pediatric specialists and dietitians. So we are a very small number. So we absolutely need you desperately to do the work because there is a ton of work out there for dietitians to do. So the more dietitians we have, the better. So you guys are more than welcome to, to the group. We need you desperately. So thank you very much. All right, you guys.